Wyoming Territory, spring of 1882. The wind carried dust down the main street of Elk Hollow as if trying to sweep away the memory of what had just happened inside the saloon. Verena Foster stumbled into the sunlight, her hands shaking against the swell of her belly. She was 7 months along, the weight of her unborn daughters slowing her steps. The crowd behind her thinned before scattering, as if the shame might stick to them if they lingered too long. She had been sold. Traded like a mule. No papers, no ceremony, just a nod from her father and a bag of coins exchanged for her future. "You will not birth bastards in this house," he had said. That was all the explanation he gave before striking the deal with an older widower from the edge of town. A man with missing teeth and a mean streak known to every woman who had ever crossed his path. Verena had not cried. Not when her father refused to look at her. Not when her mother turned to busy herself with sewing, as if she had never had a daughter at all. But when the man, Jed Kinney, tried to drag her toward his wagon, she wrenched away and ran. Now she stood alone on the edge of the road, dust swirling around her boots, one hand pressed to the side of her stomach where the girls kicked in protest. "Need a ride?" a voice called from the far end of the street. She turned, wary, her body tensing. A man sat atop a chestnut horse, reins loose in his gloved hand. He was tall, lean, with sun-browned skin and a quiet steadiness in his face. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could see the way he studied her, not like she was a problem to solve or a burden to avoid. Like she was a person. "I do not want trouble," she said. "Neither do I," he replied simply. "Name's Callum Lark." She didn't answer, not right away. Her throat felt tight, dry. He nodded once. "I saw what happened. I do not think any woman should be sold for carrying children, no matter who the father is." She blinked fast, her chest rising and falling quickly. "I have a place," he added. "It is quiet. Few hours west of here. You would be safe. Why would you help me?" Callum dismounted slowly, careful not to come too close. "Because I know what it is to be left behind." His voice was low, honest. He did not try to charm her or pity her. He just waited. Verena looked back toward town. No one was coming. Not her father, not her mother. Not the man who had tried to claim her like she was cattle. She looked back at Callum. "I am Verena Foster." He nodded once. "Come on, Verena. Let's go." The ride west was long and quiet, broken only by the sound of hooves and the creak of leather. Callum kept his distance, letting her set the pace. Every so often he glanced at her belly. "Twin girls," she said, catching him looking. He raised his brows. "That's so." Midwife was sure. "I could feel them before anyone else could. They move a lot." He smiled faintly, not a teasing smile, but like he was genuinely glad to know it. "You got names for them?" She hesitated. "I did. Before everything fell apart. You can still use them." Verena looked at him, unsure how someone could believe that after all she had lost. When they reached his land, the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the hills gold. His cabin sat near a line of cottonwoods with a small barn and a creek nearby. Everything was tidy, worn from use but cared for. He helped her down from the horse, careful with her arm, then led her inside. "I will sleep out in the barn," he said. "You can have the bed." "You do not have to." "I want to," he said, already gathering a blanket. Verena stood in the center of the room, one hand on the edge of the table to steady herself. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not owe me anything," he said firmly. "Rest. That is all I ask." Days passed in quiet rhythm. Callum brought her fresh water, cooked simple meals, and never asked questions she did not want to answer. He worked the land during the day and made sure she had everything she needed at night. One evening, after a warm stew and a long walk to stretch her aching back, she sat on the porch while he mended a saddle strap. "You really live out here alone?" she asked. Callum looked up, nodding. "Since my brother passed 4 winters ago." "I am sorry." He shrugged. "He was all I had. Took me a long time to stop expecting him to walk through the door." Verena looked out over the hills, the moon rising pale above them. "My mother used to sing to me. After I turned 13, she stopped. Said I had to grow up." Callum did not say anything, but he set the strap aside and sat beside her. "I thought I would be loved," she whispered. "When I told him I was with child, he left. Said he never wanted daughters." She did not realize she was crying until he reached over and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his fingers. You and those girls deserve better than that, he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt steady. That night, Verena could not sleep. The babies were restless and her back ached. She stepped outside into the cool air, wrapping one of Callum's spare coats around her shoulders. She found him sitting by the fire pit, sharpening a blade. You were awake too, she said softly. He looked up. Something wrong? No. Just could not sleep. He set the blade down. Sit. Fire's still warm. She did. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt like something was settling. Callum, she said after a while, why did you really take me in? He looked at her, his jaw working. Because no one did that for me when I needed it. And because I saw you standing there all alone and I could not walk away. She blinked hard. You do not even know me. I do not have to, he said. I see how strong you are. How those girls are lucky to have you already. That is enough. He reached out slowly, hesitating just long enough for her to lean into it, and placed his hand gently over hers. It was the first time anyone had touched her with kindness in months. Her voice trembled. You are a good man, Callum Lark. His eyes met hers. And you are not what they tried to make you think you are. The fire crackled between them, but neither moved away. They sat there until the stars wheeled overhead, her hand in his, the start of something real settling between them. The rains came late that year, slow and steady, soaking the hard-packed earth until it softened underfoot. Verena stood beneath the cabin's low porch roof, watching the clouds roll across the sky, her fingers absently brushing the worn edge of the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The girls stirred low in her belly, their small movements no longer the sharp kicks of earlier weeks, but quiet, steady rolls that made her pause often to breathe through them. Callum had spent the morning stacking split juniper near the back wall. Sleeves rolled to the elbows, shirt damp from effort. By the time she brought him a tin cup of coffee, his hands were streaked with sap and grit. You're making more space near the hearth, she said, offering him the cup. He took it, nodding. Figure you'll want the cradle near the warmest corner when the time comes. She studied him, the way he never asked her what she planned to do next or how long she meant to stay. He simply worked as if she belonged here already. You ever built a cradle before? She asked. No, he said, setting the cup on a stump. But I can shape wood to fit a purpose. That's most of it. She glanced toward the cabin door. I could sew the lining, if my fingers ever stop aching long enough. Callum looked down at her hands. You've been stitching too much. I like to keep busy. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not trying to. He gave a quiet nod, then turned back toward the stacked wood. I'll finish this before the rain gets worse. Verena stayed where she was, watching the way his shoulders moved, the quiet patience in his work. She wasn't used to quietness meaning safety. Later, she found an old bundle of muslin in the bottom of the cedar trunk and began cutting it into strips near the firelight. Her stitches were slower now, clumsier than they once were, but steadier than they'd been in weeks. When Callum came in, carrying a damp coat and streaks of mud on his boots, he paused beside her. You're making blankets? He asked. Swaddles, she replied. My mother made them for me. I remember the pattern by feel. Callum sat across from her and pulled off his boots, setting them near the hearth. You remember much from when you were small? She set her needle down. Some. Not all of it good. I remember the color of my brother's voice more than his face, Callum said. He used to hum while he worked. What kind of tune? Didn't matter. He never sang words. Just a sound to fill the air. She smiled faintly. That's how I used to hum to them, before everything fell apart. Callum glanced toward the window, where the rain tapped soft against the pane. You could again. Her throat tightened. Maybe. He didn't press. The storm passed by morning, leaving the sky clean and sharp as a blade. Callum rode out to check the property lines while Verena worked in the garden plot behind the cabin, pulling early weeds and turning the soil around the spring onions. When her back grew stiff, she straightened carefully and rested against the rail fence, the sun warm across her shoulders. By the time he returned, the sun was dipping low again and the air had cooled. He dismounted slowly, brushing dust from his gloves. "You're limping," she said, frowning. "Horse stumbled near the creek. Pulled something in my knee." She stepped forward. "You need to get off it." "I'm fine." "You're not." He hesitated, then gave a short nod and followed her into the cabin. She fetched a basin and a cloth, wetting it from the kettle and kneeling beside him. "You don't need to," he started. "I know," she cut in. "But I want to." She rolled the fabric of his trousers up gently, finding the swelling with careful fingers. He flinched once, then stilled. "You're lucky it's not worse," she said, wrapping the cloth around it. "I've had worse. I don't doubt that." He looked at her then, not just with thanks, but with something quieter, something that held. "I never thought I'd have a hand like this on me again," he said. "Not without it costing something." Verena didn't pull away. "You don't owe me anything, Callum." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers rough but careful. "You don't owe me either." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of closeness, of things not yet said but understood. She didn't move away from his hand, and he didn't drop it. That night, she sat in the rocker while he read from a worn volume of Whitman's verse, his voice slow and low. The girls shifted gently inside her as if they recognized something in the sound. When he finished the page, she spoke without looking up. "I think I want to stay." The fire popped. He didn't speak at first, just watched her face. "You sure?" "I am." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, eyes never leaving hers. "Then we'll make a place for all three of you. Proper." Her throat tightened again, but this time she didn't try to swallow it down. She let it come, the warmth and the ache and the steady, quiet wonder of being wanted. Not claimed, not saved, just chosen. Callum didn't reach for her. He waited. She stood and crossed the room, then knelt beside him, her hand finding his. "Proper," she said. "Together." And he nodded once, as if that had been the plan all along. By mid-May, the wild plum trees near the creek had bloomed and dropped their petals, leaving the air faintly sweet in the evenings. Verena had taken to walking the short path between the cabin and the grove just after supper, her steps slow, one hand at the small of her back, the other resting over the curve of her stomach. The girls were quiet now, settling low. It wouldn't be long. One evening, as she reached the edge of the trees, she found Callum kneeling beside a felled pine, stripping bark with a draw knife. His coat hung from a nail on a nearby post, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. The cradle frame lay nearby half-finished, its joints smooth but unassembled. She stopped a few paces from him, folding her hands in front of her. "You're working late." "I figured I'd lose time once they came," he said, glancing up. "Trying to get ahead of it." Verena stepped closer and knelt carefully beside the cradle frame. "The lines are even." "Measured twice," he said. "Didn't trust myself to guess." She ran her hand along one of the smooth beams. "You ever think you'd build something like this?" "Never crossed my mind," he said. "Until you showed up, I hadn't thought past the next season." Verena looked up at him. "And now?" He sat back on his heels, expression unreadable for a moment. "Now I make plans for 3. A breeze passed through the trees, tugging strands of her hair loose from their braid. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she watched the way his eyes didn't shy from hers. "I've been thinking," she said finally. "Once they're born, I'll need to earn. I've got my mother's treadle machine. I can mend for the ranches." "You don't have to rush into anything," Callum said. "We've got enough set aside to last a fair while." "I know," she said. "But I want to pull my own weight." He nodded once. "Then we'll set you up near the window where the light's best." She smiled, small and quiet. "You always think ahead." "Used to be, I didn't. Now I don't know how not to." She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Coming soon. Supper's going cold." He watched her walk back toward the cabin, his hands still for a time before returning to the draw knife. That night, she woke just past midnight to an ache that wrapped low around her spine. At first, she lay still, thinking it would pass. When it didn't, she eased herself upright and lit the oil lamp. Callum stirred from the cot near the hearth, his eyes opening before she could speak. "It's starting?" he asked, sitting up. Verena nodded once. "I think so." He stood, pulling on his shirt. "I'll boil water. You sit." "No," she said, steadying herself against the table. "I need to move." He didn't argue. Instead, he cleared the hearth, set the pot over the flame, and brought blankets from the cedar trunk. The midwife she'd written to weeks ago lived 30 miles south, too far now. "I'll manage," she said through clenched teeth as another wave came. "But I'll need you." "I'm here," he said, voice low and sure. "Whatever you need." The hours that followed came hard. She paced the floor, gripped the edge of the bunk, breathed through pain that came and went like thunder. Callum didn't leave her side. He brought her water, cooled her brow with a damp cloth, braced her shoulders when she leaned into him with each rising tide. At dawn, the first cry split the hush of the cabin. Verena cradled the slick, wrapped bundle against her chest while Callum laid fresh linens by the fire. "She's strong," he said, wiping his hands. Verena nodded, sweat clinging to her brow. The seconds coming. An hour later, the second girl arrived, smaller but just as loud. Callum took her gently, wrapping her in one of the muslin swaddles Verena had sewn. He held her as if he'd done it before, though his jaw was tight with something unspoken. When both girls were fed and sleeping, Verena leaned back against the pillows, her arms aching with joy and exhaustion. "They're here," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. Callum sat beside her, one hand resting on the edge of the quilt. "You did it." She turned her head. "We did." He looked at her, then not with surprise or awe, but something deeper. "Have you thought of names?" She nodded, too tired to speak them just yet. She reached for the girl nearest her and settled her against her chest. Callum didn't move. He just stayed close, a warm, steady presence. "I want you with us," she said softly. "Not just now. All the way through." His voice was rough. "You sure?" "I am." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together without hesitation. "Then we'll raise them here. Together." The girls slept on, the morning light softening the corners of the room. Outside, birds stirred in the cottonwoods and the creek ran full with melted snow. Inside, the cabin held its own peace, the kind built not from chance but choice. Earned, patient, and whole. By the second week of June, the cottonwoods had deepened to full green and the sun rose early across the high Wyoming sky. Verena moved slower now, but not from weariness. Her body was still healing, her steps careful, but because the days had taken on a rhythm she didn't want to rush through. The girls stirred and cried and yawned like tiny clock hands, their needs quiet and steady. Callum had added a screen door to the front of the cabin, fashioned from pine and stretched muslin. It let the air in but kept the insects out, and Verena often left it open while she rocked the girls after their mid-morning feed. Today, she sat in the shade of the porch, a wash basin beside her, rinsing cloths in the water Callum had hauled up before sunrise. One of the girls slept in the crook of her arm. The other nestled deep in the cradle he'd finished just days after they were born. Callum stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. That red calf's finally standing on its own. She looked up. "That the one with the crooked back leg?" He nodded. "Took time, but she's figured out how to balance." Verena glanced at the sleeping girl in her arms. "Seems like everything worth keeping takes time." He leaned against the porch post, squinting into the distance. "You've thought on a name for her yet?" Her thumb brushed the baby's cheek. "Josephine." His mouth curved, not into a grin, but something quieter. "And the other?" "Celia." Callum nodded, like he was tucking the names into some pocket of his mind. "They'll be strong. You can see it already." "They'll have to be," she said. "But maybe they won't have to be alone in it." He stepped up onto the porch, crouched beside the cradle, and laid a rough fingertip against Celia's tiny curled hand. "They've got us. That's more than most have to start with. Verena reached out without thinking and rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. I never planned any of this. Neither did I, he said. But I'm not looking for a way out. She studied him then, really studied him. The pale line of an old scar near his collarbone. The way his eyes didn't shift when hers held steady. You've never asked how it happened, she said. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. I do. Only now. Callum sat cross-legged on the porch boards, arms resting on his knees. He didn't speak, didn't prompt. I met him at the mercantile, she said. He was passing through, said he was heading to Utah to look for silver. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I think I wanted to feel chosen. Callum didn't blink. I gave him more than I should have, and when I told him I was carrying, he said nothing. Just left his coffee half drunk and walked out the door. She let the silence stretch before continuing. My father said I'd brought shame, that no decent man would take me and no decent woman would sit beside me. So he sold me off. Callum reached over slowly and covered her hand with his. He was wrong. I know that now, she said. But I didn't know it then. The breeze shifted. The screen door creaked softly. Callum's voice was even. You never have to explain yourself to me. But I'll sit with you while you do. I reckon that's the best offer I've ever had, she said. He didn't let go of her hand. That evening, as the girls settled into sleep and the light turned gold across the far hills, Verena stood at the doorway, arms crossed lightly over her chest. Callum was stacking split wood under the eave, rain still weeks away, but he worked as if time was something to be shaped. I want to marry you, she said. Callum straightened, blinked once, and wiped his palms on his trousers. You're sure? I don't want the girls to grow up wondering where they stand. I don't want to wonder either. He stepped forward, the space between them closing with quiet certainty. I'd be proud to stand with you, and not just for their sake. She met his eyes. I want it plain, no borrowed dress, no preacher if none will come. He nodded. We can speak it under the cottonwoods if you'll have that. I'll have it, she said, her voice steady. They stood there a moment longer, the last light catching in her hair, the hush of evening wrapping around them like a promise already made. Callum reached for both her hands and held them against his chest. We'll take it day by day, he said. She smiled, the smallest upward pull of her lips. That's how you build anything worth keeping. A week after Verena and Callum spoke their vows beneath the cottonwoods, the sun lingered late in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the slope behind the cabin. The wild grasses had grown tall, brushing against the hem of Verena's skirt as she walked slowly along the edge of the fence line. Celia swaddled against her chest while Josephine slept in a sling across her back. The girls were quiet, their tiny breaths warm against her skin. Callum was down by the creek, digging a narrow trench to carry water closer to the new vegetable bed he had marked out. The shovel moved with steady rhythm, and when he paused to wipe his brow, Verena called to him gently. You'll wear yourself down if you keep swinging that thing like it owes you money. He looked up, grinning beneath the brim of his hat. Just trying to keep ahead of the dry weeks. You'll need stronger arms if you mean to keep ahead of 2 girls and a growing patch of beans. He leaned on the shovel, watching her walk toward him. I'll take my chances. She reached him as a breeze lifted through the cottonwoods, rustling the leaves like distant applause. She shifted Josephine gently, readying the strap across her shoulder. I'll help turn the soil tomorrow, she said. They'll sleep longer by then. You shouldn't be lifting it. I'm not made of glass. She looked at him, eyes steady. I want to help build what we're keeping. I want my hands in the dirt too. He nodded, quiet again, but the way he looked at her like she wasn't just here, but rooted beside him held more than words could reach. That night, after the girls were down and the cabin had settled into its hush, Verena stood by the window while Callum fed kindling into the stove. Moonlight caught in her hair where it had slipped loose, and the soft sound of the creek drifted in through the open window. I was thinking about Wyoming becoming a state, she said. Callum looked up, surprised. Still a few years off, isn't it? Maybe. But it means something, doesn't it? That we're not just passing through anymore. That what we're building might last. He crossed the room and stood behind her, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. It'll last, if we keep tending it. She turned slowly, her hands finding his. You've given me more than land and shelter. You've given me a place I can belong without having to earn it by suffering. He didn't speak, but the way he held her gaze said he understood. He brushed his thumb over her knuckles, then leaned down to press his forehead to hers. I want them to grow up knowing their parents chose each other, she whispered. They will, he said. Every day they'll see it. They stood that way for a long time, the fire crackling low, the cool air brushing in from the open window, the quiet of contentment settling around them like a second quilt. By midsummer, the trench had filled with creek water, and the garden rows began to show signs of life, beans twisting up twine, young squash curling beneath broad green leaves. Verena worked beside Callum in the early hours, the girls napping in a shaded basket under the lean-to. She'd begun repairing shirts and trousers for neighbors who made the ride out from town, and with each coin tucked away in a tin by the hearth, she felt the shape of their life forming more clearly. One afternoon, an older woman rode up the path on a dun mare, her skirts dusty, her sleeves rolled. She introduced herself as Ruthie Emmons, a midwife from over near Medicine Bow who'd finally received Verena's letter. I came as quick as I could, she said, dismounting stiffly. Heard there were twins come early. They're well, Verena said, lifting Celia from the basket. We managed. Ruthie studied her a long moment. You've done fine, but I'll stay the night if you don't mind. Check you over proper, give you some herbs for your milk. Verena glanced at Callum, who had already stepped forward to take the reins of Ruthie's horse. You're welcome here, he said. There's stew on the stove and room by the fire. That night, Ruthie sat with Verena near the hearth, showing her how to steep leaves for colic and soothe sore joints with warmed flax. When the girls stirred, Callum rose without a word and lifted Josephine gently from her swaddle, rocking her near the window until she settled. Ruthie watched him, her cup resting in her lap. You picked a good one, she said. Verena smiled, her eyes not leaving Callum's. I know. By late autumn, the girls had learned to laugh soft, surprise sounds that filled the cabin with something brighter than music. The garden had been harvested, the last of the beans strung to dry above the hearth. Verena's sewing had become steady work, and Callum had built a second shed for tools and aging firewood. One evening, as frost began to gather along the porch rail, Verena stepped outside and found Callum finishing repairs on the fence post near the barn. She walked down to him, her coat buttoned tight, her breath visible in the cooling air. Winter's coming early, she said. He glanced at the sky. We'll be ready. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a small square of paper. It's from my mother, she said. First letter she sent since I left. Callum waited. She asked if she could meet the girls. She said she was wrong. Verena folded the letter again and tucked it back into her coat. I don't know if I want her to come, but I wanted you to know. He nodded. Whatever you decide, it's your choice. You don't owe her what she didn't give. She exhaled slowly, the weight of old wounds lifting just a little. I chose this life. I chose you. He stepped closer, gloved hand cupping her cheek. And I'll choose you over and over. In the quiet that followed, their breath mingled in the cold air, and she leaned forward until their foreheads touched. The girls slept soundly that night, the fire burning low, snow beginning to fall in thin whispers outside. And inside the cabin, beneath the sturdy roof they'd built together, Callum and Verena lay wrapped in one another's arms, the girls beside them, the hush of love and safety settled deep into the walls. Years later, the cottonwoods still stood tall, and the creek carved the same path past the garden. Josephine and Celia ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter echoing down the slope. Verena sat on the porch, her sewing in her lap, while Callum mended a bridle nearby. They didn't speak often in those hours, but their glances held everything that mattered. Neighbors spoke often of the Lark place, a quiet homestead where kindness lived in the walls and every fence line held steady. And those who visited always left with the same impression, that love, when built slow and true, could outlast any storm. Verena and Callum never left that land. They grew old watching the girls grow tall, their hands never far from one another, their hearts always steady. And every morning, just before the sun crested the hill, Verena would wake to the same sound, the soft hum Callum had taken to singing while he worked, a tune without words, meant only for the home they'd built and the love that had shaped it.